Welcome to British Focus, the channel where we cut through the political noise to uncover the real issues shaping the UK. And today, we have a scandal that is shaking the very foundations of the Labour Party. A financial bombshell that threatens to expose deep cracks in Keir Starmer's leadership. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is at the centre of a growing storm, accused of secretly diverting £5.1 billion from the government's budget surplus. And if that wasn't enough, this revelation has triggered a fierce internal battle within Labour, leaving Rayner furious and Starmer, reportedly, in a state of complete outrage. Let's break this down. In January, the UK recorded a government surplus of £15.4 billion, the highest for that month in over 3 decades. Sounds like good news, right? Well, not quite. That figure was already lower than the £20.5 billion that had been forecasted, raising initial concerns about the government's financial health. But then, analysts started digging. And what did they find? A £5.1 billion black hole. Money that should have been accounted for. Money that simply disappeared. Enter Rayner. According to reports, she took it upon herself to investigate the Treasury's internal documents, only to discover something truly alarming. Evidence suggesting that Reeves had quietly redirected these funds into an undisclosed budgetary move. Now, let's pause here. If this is true, we're not just looking at a clerical error. We're looking at potential fiscal manipulation at the highest level of government. Rayner, clearly furious, confronted Reeves in what has been described as an explosive closed-door meeting. Tempers flared, accusations flew, and Keir Starmer, when he was later informed of what had happened, allegedly flipped out. And who can blame him? Labour has been desperately trying to project an image of fiscal responsibility, promising to be the party that can be trusted with the economy. But this scandal does exactly the opposite. It fuels the very worst fears about Labour's ability to manage public finances. Think about it. £5.1 billion is not pocket change. That money could have been used to support the NHS, ease the pressure on struggling public services, or even provide tax cuts for hard-working Britons. Instead, we are left with unanswered questions, missing funds, and a Chancellor who appears to be in serious trouble. What makes this situation even worse is that Reeves has built her entire economic credibility on 2 key promises. First, that the government's daily expenditures would be covered by tax revenue, not borrowing. Second, that national debt would fall as a proportion of national income by the end of this parliamentary term in 2029. Admirable goals. But how can we trust those commitments when £5.1 billion has simply vanished? And let's not forget, this comes at a time when the UK economy is already under immense strain. Growth is sluggish, borrowing costs are rising, and the public is being told that there's little room for extra spending. Yet somehow, within all of this, billions have quietly been shuffled away without any transparency. Now, Labour's critics are having a field day, and frankly, it's hard to argue with them. The opposition has wasted no time in pointing out that this scandal reinforces their argument. Labour simply cannot be trusted with the economy. Even figures within the party are reportedly alarmed, fearing that this debacle will provide the Conservatives with exactly the ammunition they need in the next general election. To make matters worse, the government has doubled down, insisting that their fiscal rules remain non-negotiable. But how can the public take that seriously when we are staring at a potential case of mismanagement, if not outright deception, by the Chancellor herself? What happens next? Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility is set to publish its latest assessment of the UK's finances on March 26th. And that, my friends, could be the moment of reckoning for Rachel Reeves. If the numbers don't add up, if further inconsistencies are found, or if the government is forced into tax hikes or spending cuts to cover this shortfall, the backlash will be immense. And here's the real kicker. Reeves had previously assured the public that no further tax increases or borrowing would be necessary. But with the discovery of this missing £5.1 billion, those reassurances are now looking increasingly hollow. If she sticks to her pledge of avoiding more borrowing, then logically, that means spending cuts. But where will those cuts fall? Public services? Infrastructure projects? The NHS? The reality is that this scandal couldn't have come at a worse time for Labour. Keir Starmer has been positioning himself as a steady, responsible alternative to the Conservatives, someone who can restore faith in government. But this episode paints a very different picture. a party riddled with internal divisions, a chancellor under scrutiny, and an economic strategy that is starting to look shaky at best. Meanwhile, the public is left wondering, if this is how Labour handles finances in opposition, what can we expect if they win the next election? Are we looking at a future government that will secretly shuffle billions around, only to be caught red-handed when the numbers don't add up? The political fallout is already intensifying. Angela Rayner's fury over this issue suggests that the Labour Party is far from united behind Reeves. And while Starmer may be trying to contain the damage, the reality is that scandals like this have a habit of spiralling out of control. What we are witnessing is not just a case of poor financial planning, it's a test of trust. Can Rachel Reeves be trusted to manage the UK's economy? Can Labour be trusted to be transparent with the public? Or is this just the beginning of a deeper financial crisis within the party? With all of Westminster now watching closely, the stakes couldn't be higher. The upcoming report from the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, on the 26th of March could not have come at a worse time for Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the Labour government. The findings are expected to scrutinise the government's fiscal position, including the extent to which Reeves has adhered to her own self-imposed financial rules. With a staggering £5.1 billion missing from the budget surplus, the credibility of Labour's economic management is now hanging by a thread. And the question we must ask is, can Reeves survive this growing crisis, or is this the beginning of a financial reckoning that could cripple the Labour Party? Back in October, the OBR estimated that Reeves had a fiscal buffer of £9.9 billion to keep her budgetary commitments intact. That margin has since been eroded by sluggish economic growth, rising borrowing costs, and now, most alarmingly, an unexplained budgetary black hole. As pressure mounts, speculation is rife that Reeves will be forced to choose between two deeply unpopular options: raising taxes or cutting public services. Both choices would shatter the illusion that Labour's economic plan is sustainable and cast further doubt on its ability to manage the UK's fragile recovery. Leading economists are sounding the alarm. Cara City, a senior economist at the Resolution Foundation, has warned that the latest economic data could leave Reeves with no choice but to implement drastic measures to maintain her fiscal discipline. The missing billions, however, add an entirely new dimension to the crisis. How can the Chancellor expect the public to trust her judgment when the very numbers she has been working with no longer add up? It's one thing to ask the British people to tighten their belts, it's quite another to do so while failing to account for £5.1 billion. Reeves has repeatedly dismissed the possibility of further borrowing or tax hikes, insisting that her economic framework is built on responsible governance. But if she stands by that position, what remains? Spending cuts. And this is where Labour faces its most significant dilemma. For years, the party has positioned itself as the champion of public services, promising investment and stability. Yet the reality now is that Labour may be forced to slash spending to cover for its own financial mismanagement. The optics of this are disastrous. How does Reeves expect to maintain public trust when her own economic strategy is unravelling before our eyes? Departments across government are expected to submit detailed spending reports to the Treasury in the coming days, outlining potential areas for cuts. But the sudden discovery of a missing £5.1 billion casts serious doubt on the credibility of Labour's promises. Can they continue to claim that public services will be protected? Or will we see yet another example of economic mismanagement that ultimately leaves ordinary Britons footing the bill? It's not just political opponents who are questioning Labour's fiscal integrity. The markets, too, are watching closely. Most developed nations operate under strict fiscal rules to maintain credibility with investors. If Reeves is seen to have lost control of public finances, confidence could plummet, and the UK's already fragile economic outlook could take a further hit. The Chancellor has staked her reputation on keeping national debt under control and avoiding reckless borrowing. But the revelation of a £5.1 billion discrepancy does not inspire confidence. Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, has attempted to downplay the scandal, reaffirming that the government's fiscal rules remain intact. Yet, the opposition is not letting this slide. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride has slammed the figures, calling them proof of Labour's economic irresponsibility. According to him, this is not just a case of bad financial planning. It's evidence of a government that lacks transparency and competence in handling public funds. And frankly, it's hard to argue against that. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, has also weighed in, noting that while government revenue figures can fluctuate month by month, the broader fiscal picture looks increasingly unstable. January's borrowing was significantly higher than forecast, a trend that, if it continues, could further erode confidence in Labour's economic strategy. The Office for National Statistics has confirmed that government borrowing between April and January reached £8.2 billion, exceeding last year's levels by £1.6 billion and overshooting previous projections by a staggering £122.8 billion. Against this backdrop, the revelation of a missing £5.1 billion is nothing short of a financial disaster. Isabel Stockton, a senior economist at the IFS, has warned that while short-term borrowing is rising, the government remains committed to fiscal discipline in the long run. The problem is that discipline alone is not enough. Without a clear explanation for where the missing billions have gone, Labour's fiscal credibility is now in serious question. Reeves' insistence that no tax rises or additional borrowing are necessary is beginning to look like wishful thinking. The real issue is whether the Chancellor has the judgment to steer the economy through this storm without making matters worse. And let's not forget the broader global context. The war in Ukraine is placing increasing pressure on public finances, with growing calls for higher defence spending. If the government is already struggling to account for its own budgetary black holes, how can it realistically prepare for the economic pressures ahead? Reeves may have hoped to present herself as a steady hand on the economy, but right now, she appears anything but. HSBC's senior UK economist, Liz Martin, recently expressed concerns about the rise in borrowing, warning that the OBR could determine that the UK is already off course. If that conclusion is reached, the government may be forced to implement additional taxation and spending changes, exacerbating an already volatile economic climate. Despite boasting a record-breaking £15.4 billion surplus in January, the government still fell short of expectations due to weaker-than-anticipated tax receipts. This in itself was already a worrying sign of economic fragility. But now, with the emergence of this missing £5.1 billion, the alarm bells are ringing even louder. The British economy is not in a position to weather further instability, yet that is precisely what this scandal is causing. The longer Labour fails to address these concerns, the worse the fallout will be. Westminster is already in turmoil, and the pressure on Reeves is only intensifying. And let's not forget Keir Starmer's position in all of this. If reports are to be believed, he is absolutely livid over this debacle. And can we blame him? Labour has worked hard to present itself as the party of fiscal responsibility. This scandal threatens to destroy that image in a matter of weeks. So, what happens next? Will Reeves be able to explain this financial mystery and regain control of the narrative? Or is this just the beginning of a deeper crisis that could derail Labour's economic agenda? One thing is certain, with Starmer furious, the opposition circling, and the public demanding answers, the stakes could not be higher. Whatever happens, one thing is clear: Labour is now facing its biggest economic credibility test in years. And whether Reeves survives this scandal or not, the damage to Labour's reputation may already be irreversible.